Welcome, welcome, welcome! Welcome back to this week's episode of Closed by Mo. My name is Mohammed. I'm hopefully your favorite YouTube host on most things real estate. I'm also a real estate investor and a realtor based out of New York. And in this week's video, we're going to cover something that is a little bit of a, I would say, sore subject for a lot of New Yorkers, both landlords, renters, politicians, anyone that's involved in the New York City climate will understand what I'm talking about. But before we go any further, guys, if you're enjoying this content, if you find yourself watching it, if you find yourself sending it to other people because you think it reminds them of a conversation you guys have both had, please engage with this. It really helps with the algorithm. So drop a like, a subscribe. If you're watching this on any other platform, I don't care if it's Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, whatever it is, drop a like, drop a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. And if you scroll down, if you're watching this on YouTube, in the description, you'll see the links to all of my other social media, as well as the links to my sources where I'm citing all this information from. So without further ado, let's jump into why there are almost 100,000 vacant apartments in New York City. Now, before I go into the actual meat of this video and why I think there's almost 100,000 vacant, rent-regulated, and rent-stabilized apartments in New York City, I want to make a couple of things clear. First of all, I am not a landlord advocate, I am not a tenant advocate, I'm an advocate for New Yorkers. And second, I'm also not an advocate for any kind of overregulation in the free market, which, as we know, will always lead to negative side effects down the line, which we'll talk about very soon. So any kind of overregulation or overstepping by local authorities or federal authorities, I'm not really for that, and I'd much rather let the free market find the balance that it needs to find. Now, moving into why I think there's 100,000 vacant New York City apartments currently just left totally vacant, and why the landlords have no motivation to rent them out. Now, if you've lived in New York City for a while, or if you moved here a couple of years ago, you might remember 2019 when the previous governor signed into law the 2019 Tenant Protection Act. With any kind of overregulation, if any one side of a demand and supply equation, in this case housing demand and supply, gets too much protection, it leads to a lot of inefficiencies. And what I mean by that is the 2019 Tenant Protection Act gave a lot of protections to tenants. Some of them are very valid. However, it left out a lot of landlords from feeling any kind of motivation or incentive to actually fix up their rent-regulated apartments or rent-stabilized apartments and let them rent out in the market. Now, what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, the protections that the tenants had, which include an application fee cap, which makes a lot of sense, as well as a cap on the amount of cash they had to pay upfront to the landlord to secure a rental, like first month and security deposit. That's the cap now, which makes a lot of sense. However, there's a lot of regulations that the landlords now have to abide by. For example, did you know that in a rent-regulated or rent-stabilized apartment, if the landlord were to spend hundreds and thousands of dollars to get that unit up to market, up to market condition, with whichever market that landlord is or that apartment is, the landlord cannot charge more than $80 to $90 extra above the rent-regulated amount, regardless of how much work was being put into the unit itself. There's also other things that just absolutely boggle my mind, and I completely disagree with them. For example, a landlord, after the 2019 Tenant Protection Act was passed, can now no longer deny a tenant based on their prior evictions. So let's say, for example, you're a landlord and you have a rent-regulated or rent-stabilized apartment, and a tenant comes in and they apply for the unit, and they have 5 different evictions in their record over the last few years. You are now legally not able to deny them based off of their eviction history, which I'll let you decide whether or not that makes a lot of sense. These are a couple of the things in the 2019 Tenant Protection Act that have completely demotivated and disincentivized any landlord from renting out their rent-regulated or rent-stabilized unit, and has led to the issue that we see now, where a landlord would much rather lose money on the unit, leave it completely vacant, and never rent it out, rather than put someone in there that will be very difficult to maybe even extend their rent regulation or update the rental amount or even evict that tenant later on down the line if that tenant were to cause them any issues. With that being said, guys, I hope this sheds a little bit more light in why there are almost 100,000 vacant apartments in New York City. I hope you really enjoyed this video. Drop a like or subscribe, and in the next couple of weeks, I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the 2019 Tenant Protection Act and actually dissect it a bit further. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.